The glass of wine slipped from Evangeline Chen's trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of her father's study as she stared at the photographs scattered across his mahogany desk. There, in vivid color, was her father Vincent Chen, the man who had raised her as his precious only child for 22 years, embracing a woman who wasn't her mother, surrounded by 3 children who shared his distinctive dark eyes and strong jawline. The date stamp on the photos revealed they were taken just last month at what appeared to be a birthday celebration, complete with cake and candles and the kind of genuine joy that Evangeline thought only existed in her own family. Her knees buckled as the devastating truth crashed over her like a tsunami. Her entire life had been built on a lie. Vincent Chen had always been Evangeline's hero, the successful architect who built their family's empire from nothing, who taught her that integrity was the foundation of everything worthwhile in life. Every Sunday morning, he would take her to their favorite cafe where he would tell her stories about his childhood in Taiwan, about coming to America with nothing but dreams and determination. "You are my greatest achievement, Eva," he would say, using the pet name that made her feel like the center of his universe. "Everything I've built for you." She had believed every word, treasured every moment, lived her entire existence knowing she was loved unconditionally by a man she thought was incapable of deception. Now, as she picked up photograph after photograph of his secret family, she realized that while she was having those precious Sunday morning conversations, he was probably thinking about getting home to his other children, his other wife, his other life. The sound of the front door opening sent panic shooting through her veins. Evangeline quickly gathered the photographs, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold them, and shoved them into her purse just as Vincent's familiar footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Eva. Are you here, sweetheart?" his voice called out, warm and loving as always, but now it sounded like poison in her ears. She forced herself to breathe, to compose her face into some semblance of normalcy, even though her world was crumbling around her. When he appeared in the doorway of his study, he looked exactly the same as he always did, distinguished silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the slight smile that had always made her feel safe. But now she saw him differently, now she saw a stranger wearing her father's face. "Dad," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. He frowned slightly, immediately picking up on something being wrong, because that was the kind of father he had always been to her, attentive, caring, protective. "You look pale, sweetheart. Are you feeling all right?" The concern in his voice was so genuine, so perfectly performed, that for a moment she almost convinced herself she had imagined everything. But the weight of the photographs in her purse reminded her that this nightmare was horrifyingly real. "I was just looking for some documents for my presentation tomorrow," she lied, amazed at how steady her voice sounded when her entire world was falling apart. "I should probably head home and get some rest." He nodded, moving toward her with the intention of giving her their usual goodbye hug, but she stepped back instinctively. The hurt that flashed across his face was almost enough to break her resolve, almost enough to make her pretend she had never seen what she had seen. That night, Evangeline sat in her apartment surrounded by the photographs, studying every detail of her father's secret family. The woman was beautiful in an understated way, with laugh lines around her eyes and a kind of natural elegance that spoke of quiet confidence. The children looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way that suggested they had never known betrayal or deception. The oldest appeared to be around 16, a boy with Vincent's stubborn chin and intelligent eyes. The middle child was a girl, perhaps 14, with delicate features and a bright smile that reminded Evangeline painfully of her own childhood pictures. The youngest was a boy who couldn't be more than 10, laughing as he held up what appeared to be a trophy, with Vincent's hand proudly resting on his shoulder. They looked like a real family, a complete family, the kind of family Evangeline had thought she belonged to. The next morning brought no relief, only a grim determination to uncover the full extent of her father's deception. Evangeline called in sick to work and spent the day conducting her own investigation, using skills she had learned in her journalism classes to piece together the puzzle of her father's double life. Property records revealed that Vincent owned a house in Millfield, a suburb about 40 minutes away from their family home. The house was registered under the name Lillian Chen, purchased 8 years ago. 8 years. Evangeline calculated quickly, that meant this secret family had existed since she was 14, throughout her high school years, through her college graduation, through every major milestone when she thought she was the only child receiving his love and attention. School records were harder to access, but Evangeline's college roommate worked at the district office and was willing to bend a few rules for an old friend. The names she discovered felt like daggers to her heart: Marcus Chen, 16 years old, honor student and captain of his debate team. Isabella Chen, 14 years old, straight-A student with a talent for piano. And little Nathan Chen, 10 years old, who apparently excelled at soccer and had been featured in the local newspaper for winning a youth writing contest. They weren't just her father's secret children, they were accomplished, beloved children who seemed to have inherited all the best parts of Vincent Chen's character. The parts she thought were exclusively hers. The drive to Millfield felt like the longest journey of Evangeline's life, each mile taking her further away from the innocence she had lost forever. The house at 142 Maple Street was beautiful, a craftsman-style home with a wraparound porch and a garden that showed signs of loving care. It was smaller than the mansion where Evangeline had grown up, but it radiated warmth and contentment in a way that made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. She parked across the street, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, and watched as the family she never knew existed went about their evening routine. Through the large front window, she could see them gathered around a dining room table, sharing a meal and laughing at something one of the children had said. Vincent was there, of course, looking more relaxed and genuinely happy than Evangeline had ever seen him. The front door opened and Isabella Chen stepped onto the porch, her violin case in hand. Even from a distance, Evangeline could see that the girl was beautiful, with long dark hair and a kind of natural grace that spoke of confidence and happiness. She was followed by Marcus, who was tall for his age and carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that reminded Evangeline painfully of their father. They walked down the street together, probably heading to music lessons or some other enriching activity that Vincent was undoubtedly paying for with the same generosity he had always shown Evangeline. The sight of them, so comfortable in their world, so unaware that their very existence was destroying someone else's life, filled Evangeline with a rage she had never experienced before. That rage carried her through the next several days as she meticulously planned her next move. She considered confronting her father directly, but something held her back, perhaps the fear that he would simply lie to her again, or perhaps the deeper fear that he would choose them over her if forced to make a decision. Instead, she decided to approach the children first, to understand exactly what her father had told them about his life, about her existence or lack thereof. The opportunity came when she discovered that Marcus and Isabella both attended Millfield High School, and their schedules were posted on the school's website for various academic competitions and activities. Evangeline positioned herself outside the school on a Thursday afternoon, her heart pounding as she waited for them to emerge. When she finally saw them walking together toward the parking lot, deep in conversation about something that was making Isabella laugh, she felt a complex mixture of hatred and heartbreak. They looked so much like her, so much like the family photos that lined the walls of her childhood home, but they also looked like strangers, like people who belonged to a world she had never been invited to join. She approached them slowly, her carefully rehearsed words dissolving in her throat as they looked up at her with curious, friendly expressions. "Excuse me," she managed to say, her voice sounding strangely detached from her body. "Are you Marcus and Isabella Chen?" They exchanged a quick glance, the kind of sibling communication that spoke of years of shared secrets and inside jokes. "Yes," Marcus said cautiously, his protective instincts clearly kicking in as he stepped slightly in front of his sister. "Do we know you?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that none of them fully understood yet. "My name is Evangeline," she said, watching their faces carefully for any sign of recognition. "I think we might be related." The conversation that followed was surreal, like something out of a fever dream. Marcus and Isabella had never heard of Evangeline, had no idea that their father had another daughter, another family, another entire life that existed parallel to theirs. Their shock was genuine and heartbreaking, their confusion so complete that Evangeline almost felt sorry for them. "Almost. That's impossible," Isabella whispered, her face pale with dawning horror. Dad would never, he's not the kind of person who would. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Evangeline had brought copies of the photographs, birth certificates, school records, everything she had discovered during her investigation. How long have you known? Marcus asked, his voice hollow with the same devastation that Evangeline had felt when she first discovered the truth. A week, she admitted, surprised by the sympathy she felt for these strangers who were also, somehow, her family. I found the photos by accident. I had no idea you existed either. The three of them stood in the parking lot of their high school, 3 children of Vincent Chin trying to process a betrayal that was too large to fully comprehend. Cars pulled out around them, other students heading home to families they trusted, to parents who hadn't shattered their understanding of love and loyalty and truth. Isabella started crying first, quiet tears that spoke of a deep, inconsolable hurt. What are we supposed to do now? She asked, and Evangeline realized that she was looking to her for answers, as if being the oldest gave her some special wisdom about how to handle having your life destroyed by the person you loved most. I don't know, Evangeline admitted, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. But I think we need to talk to him. Together. Marcus nodded grimly, his jaw set in a way that reminded her painfully of Vincent's determination when he was facing a difficult decision. Tonight, he said. We'll tell Mom we're staying late for study group. Can you meet us at the house at 7? The walk up to the front door of 142, Maple Street felt like walking to her own execution. Evangeline's hands were shaking as Marcus used his key to let them inside, and she was struck by how much the house felt like a home, family photos covering every surface, children's artwork on the refrigerator, the kind of comfortable chaos that spoke of a family that spent time together, that enjoyed each other's company. It was everything she had thought her own family was, but somehow more authentic, more lived in. The sound of Vincent's laughter drifted from the kitchen, followed by a woman's voice saying something that made him chuckle. Lillian, Evangeline thought. The other wife. The one who got to wake up next to him every morning, who shared his daily life in ways that Evangeline had never been allowed to. When Vincent appeared in the living room and saw the three of them standing together, his face went through a series of emotions so quickly that Evangeline could barely process them all. First confusion, then recognition, then a terror so pure and complete that she almost felt sorry for him. Eva, he whispered, and she could hear 22 years of love and guilt and desperate hope in the way he said her name. What are you doing here? Behind him, Lillian emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face curious and welcoming until she saw the tableau in her living room and understood that something terrible was happening. Tell her who I am, Dad, Evangeline said, her voice stronger than she had expected it to be. Tell your wife about your other daughter. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Lillian's sharp intake of breath and the distant noise of Nathan playing video games upstairs, blissfully unaware that his world was about to change forever. Vincent's face crumpled, and for the first time in her life, Evangeline saw her father cry. Not the single tear he had shed at her college graduation, not the misty eyes during sentimental commercials, but real, devastating sobs that spoke of a man who knew his carefully constructed world was falling apart. I can explain, he said, but his voice was broken, and they all knew that no explanation could possibly make this right. I never meant for it to happen this way. I love all of you so much, and I thought I could keep everyone safe, everyone happy, if I just. But there were no words that could bridge the gap between intention and betrayal, between love and deception. Lillian sank into a chair, her face white with shock, and Evangeline realized that she too had been living a lie, believing she was married to a man who was completely devoted to their family. The confrontation that followed was raw and devastating, with accusations flying and years of hidden pain finally finding voice. Marcus, usually so composed, screamed at Vincent with all the fury of a teenager whose hero had fallen from grace. Isabella cried silently, her tears falling like rain as she struggled to understand how the father she adored could have lied to her every day of her life. Lillian's questions came rapid fire, each one revealing another layer of deception, the business trips that were really visits to Evangeline's family, the late nights at the office that were actually dinner dates with his first wife, the birthday parties and school events he had missed because he was living his other life. But it was little Nathan's appearance at the top of the stairs, drawn by the shouting, that finally brought the room to a stunned silence. "Why is everyone yelling?" he asked in his small voice, and Evangeline's heart broke for this innocent child who was about to learn that the world was much more complicated and painful than he had ever imagined. Vincent looked up at his youngest son, and Evangeline saw something die in his eyes, the final recognition that there was no way to protect everyone he loved from the consequences of his choices. In the days that followed, the Chen families, both of them, struggled to find a new normal in the wreckage of their old lives. Evangeline moved out of her apartment and into a hotel, unable to bear the thought of her father paying her rent when she now knew that money was being stretched between two families. She quit her job at his architectural firm, unable to pretend that their professional relationship could continue unchanged. The other children were dealing with their own upheavals. Marcus had stopped speaking to Vincent entirely, Isabella was seeing a counselor to help process her emotions, and Nathan kept asking when Daddy was coming home, not understanding why he was suddenly staying at a hotel too. The media attention was inevitable, of course. Vincent Chen was a prominent figure in the city's business community, and the story of his secret double life was too salacious for the press to ignore. Headlines screamed about deception and betrayal, photographers camped outside both houses, and Evangeline found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. The worst part was the way some articles portrayed her as the villain, the vengeful daughter who had destroyed two families out of spite. They didn't understand that she hadn't set out to hurt anyone, she had simply wanted to understand why her life had been built on lies. It was during this media circus that Evangeline first spoke to Lillian alone. They met at a small cafe on the other side of town, two women who had never chosen to be connected but who now shared a bond forged by betrayal and confusion. Lillian was smaller than she had appeared in the photographs, with gentle eyes that showed the strain of recent weeks. "I don't blame you," were her first words, and Evangeline was surprised by the relief she felt. "If I had found out the way you did, I probably would have done the same thing." Their conversation stretched for hours as they compared notes on the man they had both loved, the man who had somehow managed to live two completely separate lives for over a decade. They discovered that Vincent had told similar lies to both families, that he had used the same excuses and the same carefully constructed explanations to justify his frequent absences. "He gave me this for our 10th anniversary, Lillian said, touching a delicate necklace at her throat. "Told me it was one of a kind, that he had it specially made." Evangeline's hand went instinctively to her own throat, where an identical necklace had hung for years, a gift for her 18th birthday that she had treasured because he had told her the exact same story. But as painful as these revelations were, Evangeline found herself genuinely liking Lillian. She was intelligent and funny, with a dry sense of humor that helped lighten the weight of their impossible situation. More importantly, she was clearly a devoted mother who loved her children fiercely and who was struggling to help them process emotions that no child should have to face. "Marcus wants to meet you properly," Lillian admitted during their second coffee meeting. "He's angry at his father, but he's curious about you. I think he sees you as an ally in all this mess." The relationship that developed between Evangeline and her half-siblings was unlike anything she could have imagined. Marcus, once he got over his initial anger and suspicion, revealed himself to be thoughtful and mature beyond his years. He had inherited Vincent's analytical mind and his ability to see problems from multiple angles, but he also had a moral clarity that their father seemed to lack. "I used to want to be just like him," Marcus confided during one of their long walks around Millfield. "Now I want to be everything he's not. I want to be honest, even when it's hard. I want to be someone people can trust completely." Isabella was more fragile, more wounded by their father's betrayal, but she was also incredibly resilient. She channeled her pain into her music, composing haunting melodies that spoke to the complexity of love and loss and forgiveness. When she finally felt comfortable enough to play for Evangeline, the older girl was moved to tears by the raw emotion in her half-sister's performance. "Music doesn't lie," Isabella said simply. "It can't pretend to be something it's not. I wish people were more like music." Even Nathan, despite his young age, seemed to sense that something fundamental had changed in his world. He was quieter than usual, more clingy with his mother, but when Evangeline visited, he would study her face with the intense curiosity of a child trying to understand how families work. "Are you my sister?" he asked one day with characteristic directness. When she confirmed that yes, she was his sister, he nodded solemnly and then asked if that meant she would come to his soccer games like Marcus and Isabella did. The simple acceptance in his question broke something open in Evangeline's chest, a barrier she hadn't even realized she had built. Vincent, meanwhile, was struggling with his own demons. He had moved into a small apartment, caught between two families who no longer trusted him and a community that now saw him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception. He sent letters to all his children, long, rambling explanations that tried to justify his choices without excusing them. His letters to Evangeline were particularly painful to read, filled with memories of their shared past and desperate pleas for understanding. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he wrote. "But please don't let my failures destroy the love we shared. That love was real, Eva, even if everything else was built on lies." The custody arrangements were complicated, made more so by the fact that Vincent's financial resources were now stretched thin between maintaining 3 separate households. Lillian had filed for divorce, of course, but she was also practical enough to understand that completely cutting Vincent out of the children's lives would hurt them more than it would hurt him. A schedule was worked out that allowed him to see Marcus, Isabella, and Nathan on weekends, supervised visits that felt awkward and forced compared to the easy intimacy they had once shared. Evangeline found herself in the strange position of being the adult child who had to decide whether to maintain a relationship with her father. Part of her wanted to cut him out of her life completely, to punish him for the years of lies and a childhood she now realized had been built on deception. But another part of her remembered the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night helping her with her college applications, who had been her biggest supporter and her greatest champion. Could she separate the father who had loved her from the man who had betrayed them all? The answer came during an unexpected encounter at the cemetery where Vincent's parents were buried. Evangeline had gone there seeking some kind of peace, some connection to family members who had lived their lives with integrity and honesty. She was surprised to find Vincent there as well, kneeling beside his mother's grave with flowers in his hands and tears on his cheeks. He looked older than she had ever seen him, diminished by the weight of his choices and the consequences they had brought. "I used to come here when I was struggling with difficult decisions," he said without looking up, somehow sensing her presence behind him. "My mother always knew the right thing to say, the right way to look at a problem. I keep hoping she'll tell me how to fix what I've broken." His voice was hollow with despair, and Evangeline felt her anger warring with the sympathy that seemed to be an inescapable part of loving someone. "But I think maybe some things can't be fixed," he continued. "Maybe some mistakes are too big, too fundamental, to ever make right." They stood in silence among the headstones, father and daughter separated by betrayal but connected by 22 years of shared history that couldn't be erased no matter how much pain had come after. "Why?" Evangeline asked finally, the question that had been burning inside her for weeks. "Why did you do it? Why couldn't you just choose one family and be honest with them?" Vincent was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer, but when he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of years of rationalization and self-deception. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "I fell in love with your mother when I was young, and we built a beautiful life together. But then she got sick, you remember, when you were 12. The doctors said she might not make it, and I was so scared of losing everything that I threw myself into work, into anything that would distract me from the possibility that she might die. I met Lillian during that time, and she was kind and gentle and she made me feel like I could breathe again. When your mother recovered, I should have ended things with Lillian, but by then Marcus was on the way, and I couldn't bear the thought of abandoning him." The explanation was inadequate, of course. It didn't justify years of lies and deception, didn't excuse the pain he had caused to so many people who had trusted him. But it helped Evangeline understand that her father's betrayal wasn't born of malice or lack of love, it was born of weakness and fear and a series of choices that had seemed reasonable in the moment but had snowballed into something monstrous. I thought I could give everyone what they needed, Vincent continued. I thought I could love you all enough to make up for the lies. I was wrong about so many things, but I was never wrong about loving you, Eva. Never. The healing process was slow and painful and incomplete. There were therapy sessions and family meetings and long conversations that left everyone emotionally exhausted. Evangeline had to learn to see her childhood differently, to understand that moments she had treasured as proof of her father's devotion were actually stolen time that belonged to his other family. Marcus struggled with anger and disappointment, while Isabella channeled her pain into increasingly beautiful and heartbreaking music. Nathan, with the adaptability of childhood, gradually accepted the new reality of having a big sister who lived in a different house but who came to his soccer games and helped him with his homework. Lillian proved to be stronger than anyone had expected, rebuilding her life with a determination that impressed everyone who knew her. She went back to school to finish the degree she had abandoned when Marcus was born, eventually becoming a social worker who specialized in helping families navigate difficult transitions. I learned that you can't control what other people do, she told Evangeline during one of their regular coffee meetings. But you can control how you respond, how you choose to move forward. The relationship between Evangeline and her half-siblings deepened over time, growing into something that felt like real family despite the unusual circumstances of their connection. Marcus became her closest confidant, the brother she had always wanted but never knew she needed. Isabella's music became a soundtrack to their healing, her compositions capturing the complex emotions that none of them could fully express in words. And Nathan, with his boundless capacity for love and forgiveness, reminded them all that family wasn't just about blood or history, it was about choosing to care for each other despite everything that tried to pull them apart. Vincent remained on the periphery of their lives, a figure they all loved but couldn't fully trust. He attended the important events, graduations, recitals, soccer championships, but always with the awareness that his presence was conditional, that he had forfeited the right to be the center of their world. The weekly dinners they had once shared were replaced by careful, supervised visits that felt more like appointments than family time. He had aged years in a matter of months, his hair gone completely silver, his shoulders bent with the weight of regret and lost opportunities. The media attention eventually died down, replaced by newer scandals and more current tragedies, but the Chen families were forever changed by their time in the spotlight. Evangeline had learned to be more private, more careful about whom she trusted with her story. Marcus had developed a fierce protective instinct for his family, while Isabella had become more introspective, channeling her experiences into art that spoke to others who had faced betrayal and loss. Nathan, mercifully, was young enough that the worst of the publicity had passed over his head, leaving him free to simply be a child who happened to have a more complicated family structure than most. 2 years after that first devastating discovery in Vincent's study, Evangeline stood in the audience at Carnegie Hall, watching Isabella perform a piece she had composed called Fractured Light. The music was complex and beautiful, full of discordant notes that somehow resolved into harmony, of broken melodies that found their way back to wholeness. As Isabella's fingers danced across the keys, Evangeline felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, but tears of pride and love and gratitude for the family she had gained even as she lost the illusions she had once cherished. After the performance, as they all gathered backstage, Lillian beaming with pride, Marcus whistling his appreciation, Nathan chattering excitedly about his sister's awesome piano playing, Evangeline caught sight of a familiar figure in the shadows. Vincent stood at the edge of the crowd, his face wet with tears, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. He had come to support his daughter, even knowing he might not be welcome, even knowing his presence might cause pain. When Isabella noticed him, she hesitated for just a moment before walking over and giving him a careful hug. "Thank you for coming, Dad," she whispered, and Evangeline saw Vincent's face crumble with relief and gratitude. In that moment, watching her father embrace the daughter whose trust he was still trying to earn back, Evangeline understood something profound about forgiveness and family and the complicated nature of human love. Vincent Chen had made terrible choices that had hurt people he claimed to love. He had built his life on deception and had destroyed the trust of everyone who mattered to him. But he was also the man who had taught Isabella to play piano, who had never missed one of Marcus's debate competitions, who had sat by Nathan's bedside when he had pneumonia, who had raised Evangeline to believe in herself and in the power of determination and hard work. People, she realized, were not simple equations where one terrible choice could cancel out decades of love and devotion. They were complex, contradictory beings capable of both extraordinary selflessness and profound selfishness, sometimes within the same day, sometimes within the same moment. Vincent's betrayal would always be part of their family story, but it didn't have to be the end of it. They could choose to write new chapters, to build something different but equally valuable from the wreckage of what had come before. The reconciliation was not complete, might never be complete in the way it had been before the lies were revealed. But it was real and honest and built on a foundation of truth rather than deception. Vincent would have to earn back their trust one day at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one kept promise at a time. They would all have to learn new ways of being family, ways that acknowledged their pain while still making room for love. As they left Carnegie Hall that night, walking together through the streets of New York City, Evangeline felt something she hadn't experienced since that terrible day in her father's study. She felt whole. Not because the pain had disappeared, not because the betrayal had been erased, but because she had learned that healing didn't require forgetting. It required choosing to move forward, choosing to believe in the possibility of redemption, choosing to love imperfect people in an imperfect world. Marcus walked beside her, pointing out architectural details that reminded him of their father's work, while Isabella hummed snatches of melody that would probably become her next composition. Nathan held both his mother's hand and Evangeline's, chattering about everything and nothing with the boundless energy of a child who felt safe in his world. Behind them, Vincent walked alone but not abandoned, a man who had lost everything but was slowly, carefully, trying to build something new from the pieces. The story of the Chen families would never be simple or easy to explain to outsiders. It was a story of betrayal and forgiveness, of secrets revealed and trust rebuilt, of a father who had tried to love too many people and ended up hurting them all. But it was also a story of resilience and grace, of siblings who had found each other across the divide of their father's deception, of a family that had learned to define itself not by the lies that had brought them together but by the truth they chose to create moving forward. In the end, Evangeline understood that family was not about perfection or even about honesty, it was about commitment, about choosing to stand by each other even when everything fell apart, about believing that love could survive even the worst betrayals if people were willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust. Her father had shattered their world, but from the pieces, they had built something new, something stronger, something that could withstand the storms that inevitably come to every family. The last scene of their story was not an ending but a beginning, not a resolution but a promise to keep trying, keep loving, keep believing in the possibility that broken things could be made whole again, not by pretending the breaks had never happened, but by learning to see the beauty in the scars, the strength that comes from surviving the worst and choosing to hope for better. Love, Evangeline had learned, was not about finding perfect people to care for, it was about choosing to care for imperfect people perfectly, completely, without condition or reservation, even when they disappointed you, even when they broke your heart, even when they forced you to rebuild everything you thought you knew about what it meant to be family.